We've got two big boxing matches on Saturday, so I have two guests here with me to discuss the bouts. First, New York Post boxing writer Jared Schwartz and also freelance sports combat writer Bryan Fonseca. Glad to have you here, guys. So let's get right into it. First up, we have a fighter who I love to watch. That's Vasiliy Lomachenko versus Jermaine Ortiz at the Hulu Theater at MSG. Now, Loma, he's a huge favorite here in his first fight since returning to Ukraine to fight for his home country. So do you expect this fight to be an easy hurdle for Lomachenko to clear? Jared, I'll start with you first.
Like you said, Dexter, this is his first fight in 10 months since he went to the Ukraine to help his homeland defend itself against Russia's invasion. Before that, he was looking to fight George Kambosos for the unified lightweight world title. That was going to be one of the biggest fights of his career to relaunch his quest for the undisputed title. Going to Ukraine kind of put a pause in all of that and kind of set him back a little bit on that quest. Now he's back 10 months later. Look, I spoke to him before the fight. This is a tune-up fight to get back on that quest for the undisputed title. Ortiz is not a highly ranked contender. He's a fringe top 10 contender. This is a fight that Lomachenko expects to win easily, and then launch his quest again to take on the elite fighters again in the division, like current undisputed champion Devin Haney. Shakur Stevenson mentioned his name after his last bout. This bout relaunches his quest to kind of go for the undisputed title again.
Yeah, it definitely does there. Now, Bryan, how do you feel about that? You feel like this is an easy one for Lomachenko here as well?
I mean, I think he's going to win, but I think Jermaine Ortiz does deserve a little bit more respect. Like, he did beat Jamel Herring in his last fight, and Jamel Herring was the former WBO champion at this weight. And Jamel Herring is somebody who had the title for 2 years and had 3 successful title defenses. So I think Jermaine Ortiz deserves a bit of credit for that, and he is undefeated after all. He won the IBF USA and the NABF lightweight titles, and typically when you win those titles, that means you're next to get a title shot, or, you know, you're going to get one at some point. Typically, guys who win the NABF title, they get that distinction. However, Vasiliy Lomachenko is going to beat him, and I think that given that he's coming back from the Ukraine, you know, maybe that renewed a sense of focus, whatever the case may be. Like, he was very good in his last fight against Richard Commey, so I'm not trying to say he was slipping, but he did lose to Teofimo Lopez because it took him a while to get going, and he's been on the path to get the titles back. To Jared's point, as you said, I think that he is eyeing the Devin Haney fight. He has said so, and Devin Haney is the guy in the lightweight division because he has all the titles, and I think Vasiliy Lomachenko is going to beat Jermaine Ortiz and get that. But I think Jermaine Ortiz is going to make this a little tougher than people think. Still think Lomachenko probably is going to stop him because he knows he needs to make a statement to get those title shots.
All right, guys. Now, the other fight of the night that features YouTube sensation Jake Paul versus UFC legend Anderson Silva. So, Bryan, I'm starting with you first. Is this the biggest test of Paul's career?
I mean, yes, because it's the only guy that has actual boxing experience that he's fought. Because all the other guys were just, you know, former MMA guy. Ben Askren wasn't even a striker in MMA. Tyron Woodley is one of these wrestlers who like discovered he had power, then wanted to start knocking people out, not a boxer. Anderson Silva at least has boxing experience, so we'll give him that. Not only does he have boxing experience, he actually beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. in Mexico last year in a boxing match, like in Mexico. And Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., say what you want, he doesn't have heart, this and that. Like, a lot of criticisms, especially in boxing world, but Anderson Silva did beat him, and he is somebody who is a former world champion. So credit to Anderson Silva for doing that. However, Anderson Silva is closer to 50 years old than Jake Paul is to 30 years old, which is another reason why this fight is happening. And, you know, just because he's 3-1 as a boxer doesn't mean like this is some like great competition, because you're looking at the age discrepancy. This isn't fighting Anderson Silva at his peak when Anderson Silva was the pound for pound mixed martial arts fighter in the world at one point. And even so, that's still an entirely different discipline. I don't think people quite grasp that. But, you know, it's his toughest challenge from the standpoint of like he's fighting somebody with actual boxing experience who actually beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. But it's still like we're still at the early stages of his career where like he's being matched up well, I'll say. And boxers typically are like actual ones, but you know, like this is a little bit different. It's a little bit more of a sideshow.
Yeah, you would think that. And with that being said, Jared, is this, considering we're saying that it could be the biggest test of his career, is this something that intrigues you here at all for Jake Paul? You've talked a lot to him. Is he looking at this as the biggest test of his career and ready to rise to the challenge?
Like Bryan said, at least this is giving him someone who has somewhat of a boxing experience or somewhat of a striking experience. now Anderson Silva is not a traditional boxer, but he has launched a boxing career during his UFC career. He was known as a striker and a puncher. I've spoken to Jake Paul for a while. He's the biggest part of this newfound boxing career is to now actually fight a professional boxer. He tried to do that against Tommy Fury. He tried to do that against Hasim Rahman Jr. And both fights were canceled or both opponents pulled out, not because of Jake Paul's fault. Anderson Silva is the best striker that he's fought so far. He's the closest he's gotten to that mark so far in facing a real fighter. But like Brian said, he's not an actual boxer. He's closer to 50 years old than Jake Paul is 30 years old. But look, it is the biggest fight Jake Paul has had. It's the biggest stage he's had. It's another step to prove that he has an interest in this sport, that people will tune in to watch him, that people will pay to tune in to watch him. His career kind of hinges on people having interest in him and having people tune in to see how he actually does. This is another test to see just how legitimate he is inside the ring.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if he does win, how people feel about him beating a 50-year-old former UFC legend or former UFC champion that we've seen. Now, last thing before we get out of here, real quick, guys, prediction time. Who wins each of these fights and why? Jared, you first.
I think Lomachenko wins in a decision. I think it takes him a little bit of time to get back in the groove, to get back, fully operating with that 10-month layoff, coming off of the trip to Ukraine. But look, Lomachenko's the better fighter. He's the elite fighter. He's coming in extremely motivated, extremely anxious after a long time outside the ring. He should win by a decision. In the Paul fight, it's really hard to tell what kind of fighter is Anderson Silva going to be? What kind of fighter is Jake Paul going to be? But I think Jake Paul is super motivated. I think these extra couple of months with the canceled bouts against Rahman and Fury, he's had extra time to train and extra time to improve himself. And Silva's age might just show. So I'll predict a Fury, a Jake Paul win by decision.
Okay, Loma and Jake Paul by decision there. Brian, what do you say?
I think Jermaine Ortiz accounts for himself pretty well, but I think Lomachenko is going to stop him late. I think he's going to stop him in those championship rounds or something like that. I think he's going to, really showcase himself in a way that is like, okay, we need to see Lomachenko versus Devin Haney next for the Undisputed Lightweight Championship at some point next year, probably in the spring. And then on the Jake Paul side, we could talk about whether or not this would be my preferred outcome another time, but I think Jake Paul is going to knock out Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva has been knocked out before, but in both MMA and in boxing. And I think that Jake Paul, if nothing else, he has that power. And I think he's going to catch Anderson Silva at some point. I think if the fight goes to distance, Anderson Silva is going to win because he can't outbox Jake Paul. Because if you could outbox Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., yeah, you can outbox Jake Paul. However, I'm not sure his chin is just going to last for 8 rounds, especially because there was this whole confusion about whether or not he was knocked out in sparring multiple times before this fight, to where the Arizona, Athletic Commission had to evaluate him. And they did determine that he was, in fact, good to go. But something just seems off. And the lines, betting-wise, have kind of moved more in Jake Paul's favor. And he's become more of a favorite ever since that happened. So I'm going to lean Jake Paul by knockout. But whether or not I want that to happen, that's another story.
That is another story. We will see what happened. 2 fights Saturday night. These guys both will be tuned into it. Jared Schwartz, boxing writer for the New York Post. You got Bryan Fonseca, the great combat sports writer all around. Guys, thank you for your time. Enjoy the fights.
Thank you, Dexter.
Thanks for having us.